The following accounts have been submitted by subscribers. These stories are claimed to describe true events. I ask you to listen in good faith and decide for yourself what to believe. I've spent about 20 years attempting to research what has happened to me, always coming up empty-handed. All I know is that my home is definitely some level of haunted, and that what I'm about to describe happened. This is the only experience I've had here that I would consider fully violent. Sometime during the years 2000 to 2001, when I was 14 or 15 years old, I had a very difficult time falling asleep. Even though I'd regularly go to bed around 10 PM, I'd typically be laying in bed staring at my TV until 1 AM to sometimes 3, 4 AM when I'd finally fall asleep. This happened just after I crawled into bed for the night, around 10:30, 11. I was, as usual, too wide awake to fall asleep yet, so I was watching my TV to start the process of zoning myself out. Back then I had a waterbed, which made every slight movement extremely obvious. About 15 to 20 minutes after I'd crawled into bed, I felt something slap down on the edge of my bed, behind, on the opposite side from where I was. Considering the fact that I should have been completely alone in the room, I quickly half-twisted my body, enough to turn my head so as to see what it was. What I saw can be best described as a silhouette of a black lizard, half on my bed with its lower half still hanging off the edge. It should have been at least slightly visible from the light of the TV, but it wasn't. It was pitch black, so much so that the edges of its form seemed to somewhat obscure the lines of the silhouette, making it difficult at first to totally make out what I was seeing. It was almost like a bright light source, one that you can't fully make out the shape of due to the glare of light around it, but instead of light, it was completely black. The details that I could make out were these: that it had a triangular-shaped head, was maybe 2 feet long, and though it was difficult to make out its exact shape, it looked like it had several smaller legs between its main legs on either side. I got a good look at it for only a second or two before it suddenly began skittering towards me, sending heavy ripples through my waterbed with each movement that it made. I instinctually attempted to fully turn my body and smack it away from me as if it were any normal creature, but my arm only made it to about mid-swing before it whipped back in the opposite direction, banging it rather hard against the wood frame of my bed. My entire body soon followed, violently turning back over towards my TV. Then, suddenly, I couldn't move at all. Its nose had reached my back, and I felt it viciously wriggling itself against me until I could feel its head penetrate. Yes, penetrate. I very vividly remember feeling it thrash itself against my lungs, knocking the breath out of me, and onwards, inwards, against my heart, which felt like it was rattling at this point instead of beating, as the rest of this creature's body made its way inside of mine. Somehow it felt like its body was travelling both down my torso and up my neck. The pain was beyond intense, and I could only imagine what was happening to my insides. I was panicked, in a state of both confusion and absolute terror. I was about to die, from being shredded from the inside out. The pain only lasted a few seconds though, as soon my body became completely numb. I couldn't move or feel anything at all, but my body was violently thrashing, shaking and spasming. And I could do nothing but look directly forward towards my TV and the alarm clock on the shelf directly underneath it. My vision began to blacken from my peripheral to the centre until all I could see were the red digits on the alarm clock, with them too eventually blurring, condensing into a red dot surrounded by nothing but darkness. My ears started ringing until I could no longer hear the TV. All I could feel was my body thrashing against my bed and my arm repeatedly crashing down on the edge of my wooden bed frame. I clenched the fist of the arm that was getting battered against my bed, and in my panic, it dawned on me that I was able to do so. The more my arm was battered against the frame, the more I was able to physically react to the pain of it. I could clench my fist, but only in quick snapping motions, as if there was a push-pull battle going on for control of it. It didn't fully feel like I was doing it myself, but it was doing what I wanted it to do. The rest of my arm a bit less so. I could move it, but only with an extreme amount of effort. All the while, I could feel the black lizard still moving inside of me. It passed the top of my neck and was nearing what felt like the back of my eyes. I remember thinking that if it managed to reach them, I wouldn't have anything left, and I would be completely taken over. I don't know what made me think to do this. It didn't really dawn on me until after the event that the blows against my arm seemed to be almost beating back the black lizard's control. But in my panic state, my last-ditch effort to stop whatever was happening to me was to put every ounce of effort that I had in me to clench my fist and attempt to punch myself in the face, to beat it back away from the back of my eyes. The first swing was admittedly pitiful, but my fist landed and I felt its head dart backwards, allowing me to finally be able to take in a sip of breath. I kept hitting myself over and over, each punch getting stronger and more controlled. Numb as I was, I couldn't feel any of it, but I was still able to hear how hard I was beating into my face. It was borderline sickening, but I didn't know what else to do, so I kept hitting myself, each blow seeming to knock the lizard back little by little, until I finally felt it slither out of my back the way in which it had entered. I could move again. By the time I turned towards it, all I saw was the end of its tail slipping off the edge of my bed. I heard it hit the floor, but I never heard it run beyond that. And so I was breathing erratically. Finally, I was able to get some air into my lungs, but only through what I could only describe as spasmed hyperventilation. After a brief moment of relief, I realized that it was probably still in the room with me. Once the panic of the thought entered my head, I quickly grabbed a baseball bat and dived over the edge of the bed after it, worried that if I left it alone, it would come back and try again. I'll admit, it probably wasn't the smartest thing I've ever done, but I wasn't thinking very clearly at the time. When I looked over the edge of my bed, it wasn't there. Freaked out, I began tearing my room apart looking for it, but it really was gone. Afterwards, when I came to my senses, I remembered all the damage that was inflicted on me, and I immediately ran to my mirror to check myself for what I was convinced would be a hole burrowed into my back. But I had no marks on me at all. My face didn't even show signs of any damage, even after all of the times I had hit myself. I was on the one hand relieved, but on the other still panicked for what damage, internal, unseen, that I may still have. Needless to say, I didn't sleep that night, or any of the several nights following. I just sat ready with my baseball bat, waiting for it to come back. But it never did. I wanted to tell someone and get checked out by a doctor, but after telling a few people, they just acted like I was making it up. There was nothing I could do, but luckily I never suffered any lasting damage, and eventually I resolved to just let it go. As I stated in the beginning, I've been attempting to research the black lizard and what happened to me for around 20 years now, but I've never been able to explain it. I was and still am living in northern Florida, and the only lizards in the area are geckos the size of my fingers. I know that it was not an animal. Its silhouette was just so pitch black. My best guess is that whatever it was, I narrowly escaped being possessed by it. My family are of Hindu-Indian background and settled in the United Kingdom in the 1960s. Apart from my parents, everyone else in the following account was born in the UK. There are also two things of note before I begin. First, my granduncle was a Hindu exorcist, and second, in the Hindu religion, there is an extensive belief structure based around the dark side, demons, monsters, witchcraft. As a family, we moved into a new house that was previously owned by an elderly lady. The lady died in the house, having been found, so we were told, downstairs where she was sleeping. Once we moved in, the only furniture that we kept was a beautiful wardrobe that had a long mirror on its door. It was situated in the master bedroom. Within 2 years of moving in, my father died. Then, within 6 months, weird things began to happen after my first nephew was born. One of the first things was my mother describing how she saw my father looking over his first grandchild early one morning. After that, she began to hear voices coming from the master bedroom, calling her name at odd times when no one else was in the house. At the time, the family put it down to stress and grief. It wasn't until my second nephew was born that we started to pay more attention. His birth seemed to trigger a cascade of inexplicable events. Initially, it was voices that would moan in agony coming from the wardrobe area of the bedroom. Then we would see shades, shadow people crossing the top of the stairs. On one occasion, my mother and sister-in-law were scared to tears when they heard screams and footsteps pounding all around them, yet no one else was in the house. As terrifying as all this was, the occurrences were to get worse still. The attention shifted so as to center on my youngest nephew. He was 2 when it began, and he would sit for hours talking to various presences in various rooms in full front view of the whole family. I remember one evening when everyone was in the living room just talking. The 2 boys were playing with their respective toys when, suddenly, the youngest stopped and shouted loudly, "No, no, no, stay away, stay away, stay away." My brother had to hold him tightly to stop him from having a fit. From then on, at least one adult would always be with him. As time went by, it became increasingly clear that the activity had something to do with the wardrobe in the master bedroom. It was nighttime, and my sister-in-law woke to hear her name being called. When she looked about to find the source of the sound, she saw the wardrobe and found people on the other side, looking into the room. Most of them were of Indian heritage. She thought she was dreaming. What she was seeing couldn't have been real, and so she went back to sleep, but awoke an hour later. Again, the people on the other side of the mirror. But this time she claims that she saw one pushing its way through the mirror and into the bedroom. This is when her screams woke everyone. The whole house lit up, and the family staying at a cousin's place that night too. The very next day, we brought a Hindu priest into the house. He went around the whole home, and when he returned after having looked about the upstairs, he looked very unsettled. He told us that the old woman who had owned the house previously had been living downstairs because of the mirror. The mirror was the focal point of all the issues. It was acting like a portal, and because of our family history dealing with the occult, namely my granduncle being an exorcist, it had attracted all of the individuals in our family who had died and not reincarnated due to attachment to this material world. They were angry, and they were hungry. They were looking for peace, so they decided to use this mirror portal to attract the attention of the family, to do the final rituals for them. This was the reason for all of the activity, all of the attacks. We were shocked, and so we asked what would happen if we just got rid of the wardrobe. The priest's answer, now 30 years old, scares me to this day. "It won't matter," he told us. "They have gained a foothold in our world. The door has been opened. If you don't do the rituals in India, they will possess the youngest, and then each one of you in turn. You will all die, but not before you suffer mightily." Considering all that had happened, my nephews, the shade pushing out through the mirror and into the physical world, it could hardly be ignored. And so my brother, sister-in-law, mother and youngest nephew went to a special place in India and did the rituals. The moment the final mantra was spoken, my eldest nephew and I heard the door of the wardrobe shut, forcefully. Then, under the instructions of the priest, we took the wardrobe apart, carefully and slowly so as not to break the mirror, after which we disposed of it. Today, my youngest nephew is 32 and hates all things spooky. My sister-in-law only uses small vanity mirrors, and I sometimes get sudden chills that alert me to never look into any mirrored surfaces within the location I am in. I did once, and scared myself so badly that I did not leave my house for a week. It seems that the occult sensitivity that made my granduncle an exorcist jumps one generation, and now it is myself and 2 cousins who display, to varying degrees, sensitivity to the occult. It is for that reason that I avoid mirrors, and probably always will. In the meantime, please be incredibly careful about what furniture you keep or old furniture that you buy. And if you can, buy brand new mirrors, for you never know what may be waiting on the other side of an old one. I had a terrifying experience which affects me to this day. I am now in my 50s, and when I was a child I encountered a creature whom I believe was the devil. To think it was some manifestation of my mind, my imagination, doesn't make sense. No child could conjure a vision of the devil as I did. We rarely saw movies and only had 2 channels on our TV. These were the days before The Exorcist and Nightmare on Elm Street and Stephen King. The only impressions I would have had of the devil would have been of a red man with goat legs and a tail and horns. This creature was not like that at all. But now I am getting ahead of myself. To tell the story right, I have to give some background. When I was 7 years old, my family and I moved to Saigon, Vietnam. This was during the Vietnam War, and we lived there from 1967 to 1972. One weekend, we were out sightseeing. We'd been planning this outing for some time. A family friend, a Vietnamese man, had arranged it all, and we drove to interesting places both in the city and outside of it. I had been feeling ill, but I wasn't so sick that I couldn't go. However, as the day progressed, I got worse and worse. As I said, we'd been planning this outing for a long time, and if I had to go home, my mother would have had to also, as well as my 3 siblings. Mom hardly got out at all, so we were all determined to make this work. I had a sore throat and perhaps a fever. I remember feeling awful. We'd always had our medical treatment on the army post, but for some reason this wasn't an option. Perhaps the medical clinic was closed, or maybe it was too far away and the wait time would have been too long. And so, for whatever reason, our Vietnamese friend suggested a doctor whom he claimed was very reliable. I remember the doctor was an elderly Chinese man. He prescribed a powder which was mixed with water. Once back home, I had to drink every drop. I can't imagine how my parents accomplished this. As a child, I was a very picky eater, and consequently I was very thin. I was probably too sick to argue. After consuming it, I began to have strange symptoms, which my family ignored. I slowly lost control of my tongue, so I couldn't speak. My eyes rolled up so that I could only see the ceiling, and I began losing motor control. My parents can be forgiven for ignoring my symptoms at first. My brother, who was barely a year older than I, was my partner in crime, and we often played around and fought. We weren't bad kids, but we liked to fool adults and mess around, so my parents genuinely thought I was making it all up. My brother did as well, and he jumped at this opportunity to tease me. In fact, my mother impatiently chastised me for acting so strangely. My younger siblings were toddlers at the time, and perhaps she was in an argument with our dad, so she was too busy to notice the changes in me. I remember crying and trying to communicate with her, but it didn't work. So we went out again. At an outdoor cafe, I finally collapsed, and as I watched the palm leaf roof, I felt profound relief that at least they knew I was ill and would help me. I remember my dad running up the hospital steps, carrying me in his arms. There was a hospital run by Australians. Next, I remember I had an oxygen tube in my nose, which I hated and tried to remove, but I couldn't because I couldn't move. I saw my mother's bright red fingernails next to me and was comforted that she was near. Lots of tests, pain of needles, couldn't move, couldn't talk, couldn't cry. A spinal tap and the worst pain I'd ever experienced in my life. Next, I remember my face against the chest of a nurse carrying me to my room. She had a name tag and those hats nurses used to wear. For some reason, I was comforted by her. The rest of my stay in the hospital I won't share here. I was completely paralyzed. I could only move my eyes, and even that was random. I could not speak, and so no one knew that I was conscious. My family was there as often as they could be. Of course, since no one knew I was conscious, they didn't know that I could hear what they were saying and could feel everything that they did to me. At my bedside, the doctors told my parents I was in a coma because the drug given to me was an antipsychotic, and the dosage was for adult males. The drug had entered my brain, and the chances of my coming out of the coma were very low. And even if I did, they explained I would be severely brain damaged. I can't explain how I felt when I heard this. I was locked in a useless body with discomfort and pain and no way of moving to let others know how I felt. The doctor just read my sentence in a gentle but certain voice. Then he suggested I might have to be sent to the States, to a facility which was equipped to take care of patients like me, sent away from my family. There is not enough space here to explain my days, and besides it has little to do with my terrifying encounters. It's enough to imagine the impersonal baths, laying with my sheets soiled until someone would come to clean me. The blood drawn, the IV changed from one arm to the next. The pain of the needle when the nurse dug for a vein, not caring if I might feel it. All of this is a blur now, and I don't care to remember. The only memories which remain clear are the experiences I had at night. Horrors which made me realize that anything which happened during the day, any pain or discomfort, was better than what I experienced in the dark. At night, I was left alone. They would either dim the lights or turn them off completely. Let me explain how my room was set up. Walking in from the hall, my bed was to the left, with the head against the wall. Directly to the left of my bed was a large window, which gave me a complete view of the city. Since the window was so large, I wonder if the lights in my room were completely turned off, and the light came from the ambient light of the big city. Either way, my room wasn't on the ground floor. It may have been 2 or 3 stories above the ground. In the wall facing the foot of my bed was a door. It may have been a bathroom or a closet. I don't remember. During the night, I would lay awake, listening to every sound. The footsteps in the hall, patients crying out, muffled conversations. From outside, there was the usual noise of traffic. Now that I have set the scene, I will describe the first encounter. The door to the bathroom opened slowly. I had been left alone in the nearly dark room, and I remember fixing my eyes on the door and the desperate strain which turned to pain as I tried to move my eyes to better focus on it. A very tall man came out. He wore a stovepipe hat. This might seem almost funny, most definitely strange, reminiscent of Abraham Lincoln certainly. The man was thin and was dressed in an 1800s-style black suit. His face was as white as bone, and his eyes were black and very big. His mouth, well, that was open, and it was a big black hole. As he approached my bed, his movements were almost giddy. Once at the bed, he leaned over me and put his head only inches from my face, closer, up nearly against me. His face filled my vision. He may have spoken, I cannot remember. However it happened, I knew that he was waiting for me to die. He was waiting to take my soul as it left my body. He was hungry for my soul. What would happen to my soul? What would happen to me? They were more than questions. I was facing a horror I could have never imagined, and he didn't leave. He stayed. He was over my nose and over my mouth, just waiting. It was difficult to breathe. I remember my heart ramming against my ribs. And gradually, I don't know if it was immediately or hours later, the spirits of the dead came. Only, unlike the man in black, they didn't want my soul. They wanted my body. They crowded all around me, close also, hundreds, thousands of tortured and tormented souls. Lost, cursed. They moved in so close, their faces full of horror and rage and desperation. No eyelids, only screaming, screeching, shouting incoherently. One would be shoved away by another and replaced against my face. Then another, then another, then another. I don't remember how it would end in the mornings, whether they vanished when a nurse came in, or if they slowly disappeared as the sun rose. But they would leave, only to return again at night. It may not have happened every night as I assume, but it happened enough times for me to remember, and remember well. Where had the souls come from? Had they been hospital patients? Were they the thousands upon thousands of dead who had perished in Saigon because of the fighting? And who was that man? What was that man? I am not sure what I thought of him at the time, but I think of him now as the devil. I do remember I believed at the time that I had been possessed, or could be. I would look out the window from my bed and see more than buildings and rooftops. I would imagine the air saturated with uneasy ghosts who only wanted to escape their hell. They wanted a way out, and so they waited for a body to possess. Unable to move or communicate, I defended myself with certain mental exercises to block them out. Eventually, I came out of it. It's been so long ago that I don't remember the details, but I can remember going home and being so weak that my mother had to feed me. Gradually, I completely recovered. My family didn't talk much about it in the years afterwards, and I only think about it very rarely. But I had, and still have, a fear of hospitals, most especially of being in a hospital bed. And I occasionally see things in horror movies which remind me of those desperate faces that I saw so many years ago. But for the most part, memories of those nights are long buried, and I am so glad of that. Thank you so much for listening, and an extra thank you to those who so kindly and courageously shared their experiences with us for this episode. If you have a paranormal experience that you would like me to narrate in a future video, you can submit via the dedicated form on our website paranormalscholar.com. Equally, why not listen to one of my previous episodes if you have not done so already? All links are on screen now or in the description. Thank you again. Until next time.